we also got a report showing that consumer sentiment, which is basically how consumers feel about the economy, how they feel about inflation, it showed things are getting better, and is actually the best consumer sentiment report since July of 2021, and that was before kind of we had that big wave of inflation come up and really crest. So it's kind of like showing that we're finally starting to get back to kind of that pre-inflation period, at least in the minds of consumers, and that's good news for everyone.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by economics reporter Zach Halaschak. Zach, we've gotten some good economic news lately. Talk a little bit about what some of that might be.
Yeah, so the most recent GDP report, and they have three different revisions to this. So this is the final revision for the last quarter of 2023. Actually was revised up, so it showed GDP growth was coming in at 3.4%, which
and this is a metric for how we measure the economy overall.
Yeah, it's like basically overall economic output. So when you have good positive GDP growth, it means the economy's expanding. It means that, more importantly, it means that there's not a recession, or it's getting close to being in a recession.
Sure.
So whenever they revise those numbers up, it's a good thing. And so that was one bit of a good economic news this week. But then we also got a report showing that consumer sentiment, which is basically how consumers feel about the economy, how they feel about inflation, it showed things are getting better, and is actually the best consumer sentiment report since July of 2021, and that was before kind of we had that big wave of inflation come up and really crest. So it's kind of like showing that we're finally starting to get back to kind of that pre-inflation period, at least in the minds of consumers, and that's good news for everyone.
And potentially good news for President Biden, because he's had to deal with voters being pretty down on the economy.
Yeah, voters have completely soured on the economy, despite some of the positive metrics like low unemployment, a strong labor market, positive GDP growth. So this is kind of, it's been a challenge for President Biden to try to tell voters, hey, look, I'm taking good care of the economy, because they see inflation and they're just like, no, you're not. I can't get the same thing at the store for the same price I could a year ago. So this might be showing that voters and consumers are starting to feel like the economy is improving. And so, of course, that'd be good news for Biden. The issue with that is his economic approval ratings are still incredibly low.
Right.
And they haven't gotten much better, but a recent poll showed, I think it went up from like 32% economic approval to like 35 or 37%. So there might be a little bit of momentum. And if that gains heading into the election, that's certainly good news for him.
So now, speaking of things that are more expensive at the store, cocoa beware. When inflation heats up, there are hot chocolate implications to this. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, there are, and this is actually sort of a separate issue than the overall inflation, but there's a shortage of cocoa beans that are coming out of Africa specifically. I think it's about just under 70% of the world's cocoa beans come from two countries, the Ivory Coast and Ghana, and both of those countries are kind of afflicted with two main driving issues. One is something called swollen shoot disease, which is a disease that cocoa plants get and causes them to die. And the other is just aging stocks, so trees dying out and not having enough to replace it. So when you have that much of a shortage of cocoa beans shipped out, that drives up the price, supply and demand, basics of economics. And so right now, cocoa prices are through the roof. It's like $10,000, I think, for a ton of cocoa beans, which is the highest it's ever been, a record. And so eventually that's going to translate over into the number one, derivative of cocoa beans, which is chocolate.
Right.
But it's going to take a bit of time, because companies have all this excess stock and have kind of priced it in so that the prices are kind of set for now. But as that stock dwindles, they're going to have to start raising prices. So, come Christmas time, maybe not Easter, you might sing about the same chocolate price as Easter, but come Christmas time, it could be a big thing. You might be going to stores and be like, wow, this is double what I was paying last year, because I think cocoa prices have increased by like 240% over the past year, so far exceeding, headline inflation.
People will Swiss miss those lower prices.
They will, yeah.
Thank you, Zach.
No problem.
You can read Zach and the rest of our policy team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.